The Biden administration is pushing forward with projects from the bipartisan infrastructure law as the president marks one full year in office. Speaking alongside his infrastructure task force, President Biden said the work happening now to fix ports and roads will ease supply chain issues. While he didn't answer any reporter questions at the end of the team's update, the president fielded a number of questions Wednesday during a nearly 2-hour press conference. Joining me now to discuss that press conference and the administration's first year is Kathryn Watson. She's a CBS News digital White House reporter. Kathryn, welcome. Great to have you with us. So, as we know, the economy is typically a top issue for voters, and recent CBS News polling certainly reflects that. 1 year into the Biden presidency, what can we say about the state of the U.S. economy?
Sure. Well, by some measures, Tanya, the economy is performing quite well. Unemployment is significantly lower than it was in January. It was about 6.4% in January, roughly when Biden took office. Now, of course, it has gone down significantly to 3.9%. But of course, that isn't the only measure of the economy. Certainly where people are feeling it perhaps most, according to a lot of polling, is on inflation in their pocketbooks. Now, inflation is 7% over the last year. That is the most in roughly 40 years, which of course is going to make a real impact on people's pocketbooks. Now, particularly inflation is up in a few key areas like used cars, groceries, things that people feel on a regular basis. So that's a measure that people are really paying close attention to, and I think is something that is affecting the president's poll numbers. Another thing I think we have to think about when we look at the economy is consider how many parents with young children are still stuck at home or stuck at home on a regular basis because they can't find consistent childcare, can't find consistent schooling sometimes for their kids because of things like staffing challenges, some of that related to the pandemic. So that's another thing I think we have to think about that may not necessarily show up as much as in some of those numbers, but can really have an economic and other impacts on families.
It's interesting you bring up the child care issue in terms of how it affects people getting back to work, because we know that President Biden's social spending agenda, which would address some of that, remains parked in the Senate. Did we learn anything new about the White House's strategy on getting that big spending bill passed from yesterday's press conference?
Yeah, well, the president, Tanya, said something interesting that we hadn't heard from him before and that we'd actually kind of heard some resistance from the White House about, which is that he is willing to break up his Build Back Better agenda, that big social spending package that would cover things like childcare, for instance, into smaller bites. He specifically mentioned looking at environmental and energy issues as something that might be amenable to more senators. Now, Joe Manchin, of course, if you've been paying attention to political news at all, one of the key senators whose vote would be needed in order to pass any of this, said this morning, or said today at least, that he hasn't spoken with the White House necessarily about breaking this bill up into smaller pieces. But I think that's definitely, we're going to see some conversations happening in the weeks ahead between the White House and the Senate as these negotiations maybe get a little more fire into them now that the president says he's willing to break them up, something he has not been willing to do before. But again, it's unclear how much that would really even affect the president's polling numbers. The White House does see this Build Back Better agenda as something that would lift his polling numbers. But according to our own internal CBS polling, what would affect the president's polling numbers, approval numbers more among voters is if inflation was lowered.
Inflation. All right. That's certainly still dogging us. So, Kathryn, despite millions of Americans getting vaccinated against COVID-19 during the president's first year, the Omicron variant continues to disrupt everyday life. Of course, you can argue that no one, could predict this type of variant. But what did the president say about the pandemic, the current state of the pandemic, and his administration's plan moving forward?
Sure. Well, the president, in some ways, kind of had to walk a tight line in that press conference. He wanted to tout the achievements his administration has made in terms of the number of vaccinations that the country, certainly where we are compared to where we were 1 year ago. That is a big success. Now, the president still wants to see those people who are not yet vaccinated vaccinated, but it remains unclear, with nearly 74% of adults fully vaccinated, how many more willing people, willing adults we have who actually desire to get vaccinated or could be persuaded to be vaccinated. So that's something the administration is going to continue to see if there are any areas that they can make progress on that. Masks, the administration, maybe too little, too late, some are saying, is now looking to send out high quality masks to American households. You can now go ahead online and request free rapid tests per household. Another thing the administration is trying to do to ramp up testing, but those tests probably won't be shipping until the end of the month, and it's unclear how much they will really do to address the current Omicron wave. Another thing I think that's notable, given the president's remarks yesterday, is that he is currently polling worse than he has at any point in his presidency on his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the past year, he has polled pretty well, particularly at the beginning of last year, at the very beginning of his presidency, and that has steadily declined as people are frustrated with seemingly confusing messages from the CDC and other federal entities, as well as just frustration that we are still dealing with this pandemic 2 years in.
And still dealing with it. We are indeed. Kathryn Watson, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.